Our final topic here is topic 5 and lawlessness. So in our early section, it's worth mentioning that lawlessness really is defined by pockets of mass migration, mainly connected to the early gold rush in 1849, and the government simply can't keep up with the movement of people and the growth of towns at this time. You do have to know the difference between a federal and a state government. So a federal government are linked to Washington, D.C., think the president, and they watch over territories. So territories haven't really been defined as individual states yet. If you picture it like this, for example, they might call it something like the Northwest Territory, and that's lots of different states on the plains that haven't been defined as states yet. They've got the Oregon Territory, they've got the Mississippi Territory. So it's individual kind of pockets of land that aren't defined as states yet. These territories are controlled by judges, so the government pick judges to govern over each territory, so they can go and hear court cases. And they can also, this is the federal government, can pick a US Marshal who is responsible for enforcing law in these huge territories. He's allowed to pick his own deputies and they can raise a posse to hunt down lawbreakers. But this is quite hard to do because remember, this is on horseback. The infrastructure is not that advanced at this time, so we don't have lots of purpose-built roads. They are travelling on the trails with everybody else. We also don't have the trains or the railway in this very early period, so the way they're hunting people down is really quite primitive. They have huge territories to cover, thousands and thousands of miles, and I don't know why the word before is randomly in there. I will take that out. They are trained by the government, but the job is badly paid. And the problem with this is that they are open for corruption here, easily bribed. Now, when a territory reaches a population of 60,000 people, and this is quite easily achievable when you look at the gold rush, they can apply to be an individual state, and then they get their own state government, and they can select some of their own laws and their own legal system. When a territory has a population of 5,000 people, they can select their own sheriff, and it's normally a local man, and he's well regarded in the community. They're similar to a US Marshal, but they should only look after one county within a state. Counties can also be huge. They can cover thousands of kilometres. They've got no special training. However, how effective they were did depend. It did vary county to county. So some of them could be corrupt, they favoured their friends, they did not act fairly, and other ones did take their job quite seriously. This leads to the emergence of vigilante justice. Why do we have vigilante justice and what on earth is it? Well, vigilante justice tends to be where local prominent people like businessmen, they get together and they create their own mini law enforcement. Why would they need to do this? Well, where the US Marshal and the Sheriff aren't that effective, maybe there's a spike in crime in their state, they are taking matters into their own hands. They're not always fair, but we do see them popping up. So mining towns especially that have established themselves too quickly, so we've got a big influx of people, but no proper law and order yet. The businessmen in that area might get together, they put in some money and they pay for people to keep law and order in their states. They choose a respected member of the community to be a judge and they act like the local law enforcement. This happened in San Francisco in 1851. They have their own vigilante committee and they catch 89 suspects of crime. Half are found not guilty at their kind of mock courts. A quarter are deported out of state. 15 are handed to the law enforcement and the rest are hanged. They could be effective in deterring crime, but sometimes they would just use this power to settle scores with old enemies. And it is worth mentioning that vigilante justice very much does undermine the legal system and law enforcement. So they aren't well liked by the government. What crimes do we have then? And we're looking at ones that are specifically linked to the gold rush here. Well, we have things like claim jumping, where if some gold is found on your land, you are meant to go and have it recorded with a recorder. If your neighbour spots that you're looking quite excited because you found some gold, they might try and beat you to it to the recorder and claim it as their land. This is called claim jumping, and yes, it happened quite often. We also have salting a claim, where a con man might sell you a little plot of land and they might sprinkle some gold flakes on there so you think that it's going to be a profitable bit of land, but really it's completely useless. We also have gangs of men called road agents that wait outside the mining camps, and they are robbing anybody that looks like they have some gold on them. With mass migration, we have lots of men crammed together, and this can lead to violent fights with the consumption of alcohol and competition over prostitutes. Further, we have racial attacks as a result of mass migration and the California gold rush. So a consequence of these two things is tensions in the communities. In the 1840s, before the gold rush, the communities here are very small, but by 1849 they have exploded, and the population of California, for example, 300,000 by 1855. Prospectors come from all over the world, and this causes problems because there are tensions between different races. And quite often minorities are treated appallingly. So the famine of 1852 in China brings across 20,000 Chinese migrants who arrive in California, and they're often given terrible bits of land to mine in quite dangerous areas. They are taxed more highly than the white Americans, and they are not treated fairly in courts either. We also have problems with gang violence as well due to mass migration and the California gold rush. So another consequence of the California gold rush, we've got a negative thing here, that we have gang violence. So San Francisco's population explodes to 25,000 people after the gold rush, and this leads to a crime wave by 1851 as many prospectors who have rushed across to make it rich find themselves out of a job and they haven't struck it lucky. This leads to rival gangs fighting for control in San Francisco, and sometimes they would just walk into a saloon and fire at point blank range, killing people. Hence why we have a consequence of this being vigilante committees, because violence is really bad for business and they do not want it in their towns. In our middle section, 1862 to 1876, we've got more attempts by the government and law enforcement to get rid of crime. Now, by this time, towns are a little bit more settled, so the problems that the government have are slightly different. Firstly, we've got the problem with cowboy violence. So cowboys are arriving at these cow towns and blowing all of their money and causing lots of problems in terms of violence, being drunk. Cow towns get a reputation as being hell on wheels. As the cowboys arrive, they cause problems and then they leave again. So they are spending their wages in the saloons, in the brothels, fighting over prostitutes, etc. The law enforcement respond by building a jail, which the cowboys turn down. They put up a sign that says no guns, and the cowboys just shoot through the sign. Attempts to bring in town marshals such as Thomas Smith are effective at first. He brings his boxing skills to fight the cowboys, but he's shot at and attacked with an axe and is murdered, which shows that it's quite a dangerous job. Wild Bill Hickok, he's appointed as town marshal. However, he is not all that efficient, spends his time gambling and is asked to leave the job, and he's later murdered as well. We also have the problem of range wars. Now, as homesteaders become more settled, as do cattle ranchers, there is lots of competition over grazing land, and this leads to range wars. So it's conflict on the range over this land, over the graze as well, the pasture. So homesteaders and ranchers clash, And it is also worth mentioning that we have a huge problem with sheep as well. So sheep and cattle compete for grazing land, and sheep tend to eat the grass right down to the nub, which means there's nothing left for the cattle. They can't get that far down. They also spread something called sheep scab as well that harms the cattle. This is less of a problem once we have barbed wire becoming a bit cheaper, but until that is brought in, we have lots of conflict over this land. We also have problem with outlaw gangs. These are gangs that live outside of the law. So after the Civil War, there are a huge number of soldiers who have deserted. They're cross at the end of the Civil War, at losing the Civil War, and they move to these new towns and they have an agenda. They're very, very cross with losing. This leads to gangs of them going round, such as in towns as San Francisco, which terrifies the local people. The law enforcers can't keep up, there aren't enough of them. This is why we have the onset of vigilante justice and businessmen hiring people privately to deal with these gangs. We also have the Reno gang at this time. So they are Civil War deserters, they're con men, they are thieves, and they are targeting trains which are carrying lots and lots of gold as a result of mining in the West. So they have, in 1866, attacked a train. They've got away with $16,000. And the insurers bring in the Pinkerton Detective Agency because law enforcement have been useless and they aren't able to stop the Reno gang. So the Pinkerton Detective Agency are detecting them, and they strike again with another train robbery and they get away with $96,000 this time. Following a fifth robbery, the Pinkerton Detective Agency are successful in catching a member, and they give up the rest of the member's name in return that they will have leniency and a reduced sentence. However, a vigilante committee storms in, they don't permit this leniency, and they lynch all of the men that are involved with this theft here. Now, what does this story tell us? It tells us that law enforcement are not effective because people have to privately hire people to catch criminals. Our final story here in our conquest era is the Johnson County War, and this story is all about how cattle barons could manipulate law and order to achieve an outcome they wanted and bully small ranchers and homesteaders in the process. So Johnson County is in Wyoming and it's controlled by the Wyoming Stock Growers Association, which is a group of cattle barons who own most of the land. When they own most of the land, they tend to control politics in the area, and this is exactly what they do. Now, there are some clashes with smaller ranchers. After the Great Die-Up, we know that smaller ranchers are better off. So some of our big cattle ranchers have lost a lot of their herd with the Great Die-Up, and they are struggling. This leads to some of those cattle barons accusing the small ranchers of stealing their cattle. This is known as cattle rustling. And they ban them from the spring roundup. The spring roundup is where everybody goes and they go and claim the baby calves and they brand them for next year's cattle. Albert Bothwell is one of these bullying cattle barons, and he has fallen out with Ella Watson and Jim Averill. They are boyfriend and girlfriend, and Ella has a small ranch of her own, and Albert accuses her of rustling some of his cattle. He probably just has his sights set on her land as she has access to a good water source and he has to pay her a monthly payment in order to access that water. So meanwhile as well, Jim has been writing to the local newspaper and he's accusing publicly that he's accusing Albert Bothwell of being corrupt. So he has them kidnapped, he has them lynched. This leads to other ranchers becoming extremely frustrated and they're quite angry at this treatment. So they attend the spring roundup a month early so they can get the best calves for themselves. The Wyoming Stock Growers Association are so cross with this, so the big cattle barons are so outraged with the disobedience, they make a list of 70 small ranchers they are going to have killed. They raise $100,000 between these barons, and that is mostly going to be to pay the legal bill after because they know that this is against the law. They hire 22 men from Texas as gunmen who are going to go through this list of 70 ranchers and kill them. They're going to pay them $5 a day plus $50 for every rustler that is killed. The Texan gunmen arrive. They even put a special train on to get them to Johnson County. And they first come across Nate Champion, who they hold out at his ranch, the Casey Ranch, on their way to kill the other ranchers on the list. This isn't where they were meant to go straight away, but they were informed by one of Nate's enemies to go and shoot him first. Meanwhile, Sheriff Angus, who is from Johnson County, realises what's going on and raises a posse of 40 men to chase these invaders away. They are joined by 300 citizens who surround the gunmen at this barn, and the army have to go in and rescue them here. Now, these 22 Texas gunmen are meant to be put on trial. However, the trial is moved away from Johnson County because a jury in Johnson County are obviously going to have lots of sympathy with the small ranchers. So they move the trial to an area where they are going to have sympathy with the cattle barons. The trial is completely corrupt, and the $100,000 that the cattle barons have put in to pay for the court case, they use a tactic where they delay the court case until Johnson County run out of money to fight it, and they simply have to give it up. So the cattle barons win. However, this story is an exception because range wars do tend to die down in this era. After the Great Winter Die-Up, there aren't that many large cattle ranches left as more people are using the small model. So this really is an exception, and law and order does tend to improve.